They used to tell her she should be grateful just to be included, that she should stay quiet, smile politely, and never ask about money that wasn't meant for someone like her. But last week, when Sierra walked into her mother's living room, expecting another tense, passive-aggressive conversation, she didn't find awkward silence or half-hearted hugs. She found two men in tailored suits, a folder of blank documents on the coffee table, and the kind of smiles that never reached the eyes. "We're here to help you do the right thing," they said, and that's when she knew. This wasn't about grief. This wasn't about family. This was a setup, and Sierra was the only one in the room who saw the trap before it closed. That morning had started like all the others. She brewed her usual cup of black tea, sat by the window, and read the same letter she'd read every morning for the last 2 weeks. Her grandfather's will, written in his own steady handwriting. $50 million. All of it left to her. Not out of favoritism, out of trust. He believed she would protect what he built, not waste it on revenge or lavish living. Her mother, Veronica, received a portion too, but only enough to survive, and only if she followed strict rules. That's what ignited the fire. Veronica never wanted a peace. She wanted control, and when she couldn't get it through charm, she reached for lawyers, guilt, and weaponized memories. Sierra hadn't been born into love. She was born into silence. Her mother had always been a master at closing doors that were meant to stay open. Veronica never spoke of Sierra's father other than calling him a mistake. And Sierra, just the walking proof of that mistake. While her younger half-siblings got birthday cakes and bedtime stories, Sierra got curfews and locked doors. For years, she wondered why. What was it about her that made Veronica look at her like a wound that never healed? But even as a little girl, Sierra sensed the truth. Her mother's bitterness had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with what she represented. The only place she ever felt truly seen was in the quiet, dusty corners of her grandfather's world. Walter Collins didn't speak much, but when he looked at Sierra, she didn't feel like a problem to be solved. She felt like a granddaughter. She'd sit cross-legged in his study, watching him count receipts and scribble on yellow pads. He never pushed her away. Sometimes, he'd offer her a hard caramel from the glass bowl on his desk and say, "You've got your father's eyes. That's a good thing." It was the only real kindness Sierra had known for a very long time. Kang Thrai, the room reeked of polished mahogany and old tension. Sierra sat alone at one end of the long table, hands pressed to her skirt, hiding the sweat. Opposite her sat Veronica, veiled in black like a southern widow. Oversized sunglasses, a silk scarf around her neck, lipstick like dried blood. Her 2 younger children flanked her, and her husband Daniel stood stiffly behind them, eyes locked on some invisible spot in the corner. None of them looked at Sierra. Mr. Ellsworth, her grandfather's longtime attorney, cleared his throat. The rustle of paper was the only sound as he opened a folder with ceremonial care. He began with the small things, gifts for charities, distant relatives, even a parting bonus for the housekeeper. Veronica's foot tapped against the floor like a ticking clock. She hated waiting. Then came the pivot. "And to my granddaughter, Sierra Alina Collins," Ellsworth said evenly, "I leave the remainder of my estate, businesses, investments, properties, and personal belongings, excluding items previously allocated." Silence swallowed the room. Veronica's sunglasses slid down her nose, revealing narrowed eyes that mirrored Sierra's own, but colder. "This is a mistake," she snapped. Mr. Ellsworth didn't flinch. "There is no mistake." Mr. Collins was of sound mind. His intentions were clear. Veronica slammed her hand on the table. Water spilled. "He was dying. You think he meant this? Everything to a girl he didn't even raise? His real daughter gets table scraps?" Sierra tried to speak, but Veronica didn't let her. "No. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against his own blood. Daniel reached for her shoulder. She shrugged him off. Rachel, her teenage daughter, leaned forward. Grandpa loved us. He said so. But love wasn't the same as trust. And Walter Collins had made his choice. Ellsworth continued, voice steady. A conditional trust has been established. $1 million to Mrs. Veronica Carter, contingent on 12 months of employment and financial responsibility. Until then, the fund remains under Ms. Collins's oversight. That blow landed hard. Veronica opened her mouth, then shut it. Daniel cursed under his breath. Sierra didn't move. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about who Walter believed in. She glanced at the photo on the wall, Grandpa standing in front of his first store. His face was stern, but in her chest, something warm flickered. She smiled. Just barely. He said can for. It began with phone calls. At first they were polite, late morning check-ins. Then they stretched into evening hours, then 2 a.m., voicemails dripping in sweetness and steel. Sierra, honey, we're just trying to help you make the right decision. Don't let money ruin this family. You're not thinking clearly. You need guidance. And then came the group chat. Sierra's name became a slur in her own family. Rachel called her a snake in heels. Daniel said she was turning grief into a business deal. Veronica didn't post publicly. She preferred the intimacy of direct guilt. Messages flooded in, calling her selfish, manipulative, punishing the family for old wounds. But Sierra remembered those wounds. She remembered standing outside a mall at 12, freezing after her mom forgot to pick her up because she'd taken Rachel on a spa weekend. She remembered filling out her own college aid forms while Veronica bought a luxury kitchen she never used. She remembered being invisible in a house that only saw her when there was blame to place. Still, nothing prepared her for what came next. She came home one night to a nervous doorman. "Your mother's been outside for 2 hours," he whispered. "Says it's urgent." Outside, a black car idled. Veronica sat in the driver's seat, her silhouette still. Sierra didn't go out. She changed her building's security settings instead. The next morning, her coworker pinged her. Your mom called the office. Told HR it was a personal emergency and that they should intervene. By 5 p.m., Sierra was in her manager's office, explaining that no, she wasn't in crisis. No, her mother wasn't her financial guardian. And yes, her lawyer was ready to send a cease and desist. The line between concern and harassment had been crossed. Then Veronica took it public. Her Facebook became a stage. Black and white photos of her and Walter. Hashtags like #StolenLegacy and Justice for Walter. Posts drenched in martyrdom. When your own child turns cold, what choice do you have but to fight? People believed her. Distant relatives, old neighbors, even Sierra's former teachers chimed in about how lovely Veronica always was. They didn't know about the gambling, the debts, the fake prescriptions, or the piano Grandpa gave Sierra, sold for a weekend in Napa. But Sierra knew. So did Walter. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about protection, preserving the legacy of the only person who ever protected her. And as the attacks piled on, she saw it clearly. They weren't angry about being left out. They were angry that the one person Grandpa trusted most was her. The decision to fight back didn't come from rage. It came from exhaustion. Sierra was tired of being painted as a thief in a story she didn't write. Tired of waking up with a tight chest and checking her phone like it might explode. Tired of waiting for the next ambush dressed up as a family dinner. So she stopped waiting. She called Mr. Ellsworth first. "I need everything," she told him. "Every document, every note Grandpa left. Anything that can prove his decisions weren't made in confusion or under pressure." He didn't hesitate. By the next morning, she had a thick envelope in her hands, copies of financial transfers, handwritten notes in the margins of meeting agendas, even receipts from the monthly checks Grandpa sent to Veronica labeled mortgage, utilities, and medical. But what struck her hardest was how meticulous he had been in his final year. His handwriting grew shakier, but his notes were sharper, more intentional. He knew what was coming, but the most powerful piece came from someone Sierra hadn't seen in months, George Harper, her grandfather's oldest friend. A Marine, a man of few words, and the only person Grandpa ever listened to without arguing. They met at a quiet diner just outside the city. George slid into the booth across from her, his back straight, his eyes steady. "He said this might happen," George muttered, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Told me to give it to you if the family turned ugly." Inside was a single letter. Grandpa's handwriting, firm and slow, dated 2 months before he died. "Sierra," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer around to speak for myself. But I know you'll be facing voices louder than your own. People will question what I've done. Let them. I've watched you grow into a woman who listens to the world but never lets it drown her." He wrote about her father, said he didn't know him well, but he saw in Sierra the best of what he imagined that man could have been. He wrote about her mother too, about his heartbreak, his failures as a parent, and his regret that he couldn't undo the entitlement he had fed for decades. Then came the part that hit her hardest. "I chose you because you know how to build, Sierra. Not just businesses, but bridges. Integrity. A legacy worth more than money. You've already done the hard part. You've become someone I admire. Now you just need to hold your ground." She didn't cry. She just sat there, the weight of his faith in her pressing against every scar she thought she had hidden well. That night, Sierra gathered everything: the letter, the ledger, screenshots of her mother's social posts, even audio recordings of the late-night voicemails where Veronica called her a fraud and a parasite. Her attorney, Samantha Reed, reviewed it all with a raised brow and a slow nod. "They're bluffing," Samantha said, "but even a bluff can scare someone without a plan. Good thing we have one." When the next family meeting invitation came, a formal text with a date, time, and an oddly specific request for her to bring ID and banking information, Sierra didn't flinch. She simply replied, "Noted. See you then." This time she wouldn't come unarmed. The day of the second family meeting felt different. Sierra didn't wake up with a knot in her stomach. She wasn't trembling at the idea of sitting across from her mother again. Instead, there was a strange stillness in her, like standing at the edge of a storm, with her feet planted firmly in the dirt. She dressed simply: navy blazer, flat shoes, no jewelry. She wasn't coming to impress. She was coming to remember who she was. When she arrived, the living room had been rearranged. The usual cozy furniture had been pushed aside, replaced by a stark setup. A single hardback chair positioned opposite a semicircle of plush seats. Veronica sat in the middle, flanked by Daniel, Rachel, and 2 men Sierra didn't recognize, both dressed in tailored suits with folders on their laps. Veronica smiled as Sierra entered, but it was the smile of a woman who already thought she'd won. "Sierra," she said sweetly, "thank you for being reasonable." "I'm here to listen," Sierra replied, her voice calm. What followed was a performance. Mr. Wilson and Mr. Craig, advisors, as they were introduced, began explaining how complicated and emotionally heavy estate management can be for someone your age. They emphasized family unity. They spoke in circles about responsibility and fairness. Then they presented Sierra with a set of documents that would effectively hand over control of the entire estate to Veronica in exchange for a generous share left to her. 20%. She didn't respond right away. She let the silence stretch. Her mother filled it. "Honey, this is what your grandfather would have wanted. For all of us to benefit." For me to guide the process. You know I understand how these things work. Sierra looked at Rachel. And your medical bills? What exactly are those? Rachel blinked. That's private. Sierra turned to Daniel. And that deposit on the house in Miami you made 6 months ago, before Grandpa passed. Did you think he wouldn't find out? His face flushed, but he said nothing. I have the documents, Sierra added. I have recordings, messages, and financial logs that show every lie and every dollar spent on cars, cruises, and nonsense labeled family expenses. You spent his money before he died. You thought he'd never notice. Veronica's mask cracked. You ungrateful little... I think we're done here, Sierra said, standing. But then something happened she didn't expect. Julian, her younger half-brother, stood too. He had barely spoken during the whole ordeal. His presence had always been quiet, always in the background. But now, his voice rang out clear. I'm leaving with Sierra. Everyone froze. Her mother's jaw dropped. What did you just say? I said I'm done pretending this is normal, Julian continued. I'm not going to sit here and watch you tear her down, because Grandpa trusted her and not you. Rachel gasped. Daniel stood as if to stop him. But Julian moved to stand beside Sierra, shoulders squared, voice steady. She's the only one in this room acting like family. Sierra's hand trembled as she reached out and took his. She wasn't alone anymore. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not empty. Julian moved into Sierra's apartment that very night. At first, he kept his belongings in a duffel bag, as if unsure how long he'd be welcome. Sierra didn't push him. She simply cleared out a drawer, set out a spare set of keys, and told him, "This isn't temporary, unless you want it to be." He nodded, and she noticed the way his shoulders loosened just a little. Sierra took a leave of absence from her job and began sorting through the hardware business her grandfather had left behind. It wasn't glamorous work, just ledgers, invoices, underpaid managers, and warehouses with outdated systems. But it was his life's work. And now, it was hers. Julian started accompanying her to site visits. At first he said little, just observed, listened, took notes. But after a week, Sierra noticed him lingering after meetings, asking floor managers quiet, focused questions. One afternoon, he stayed behind with the logistics team for over an hour, walking the floor, checking product flow, pointing out miscounts in the inventory logs. "You've got a good eye," Sierra said on the drive home. "I remember Grandpa explaining profit margins at dinner once," he replied. Everyone else tuned out. I didn't. It was the first time she saw him light up. That night, over takeout containers and spreadsheets, they began sketching out ideas together. Julian wanted to push into sustainable construction supplies, low-carbon cement, recycled composites, solar integrations, things their grandfather had once mentioned but never implemented. "You really think this could work?" he asked. Sierra nodded. With the right planning and the right people, absolutely. The next morning, she contacted their attorney, Samantha, and began laying the groundwork for a transition plan. Julian would intern across departments, finance, logistics, customer relations, learning every layer of the business, just like she had. And if he proved himself, there would be a place for him at the executive table in the future. She didn't hand him the business. She offered him a seat at the foundation of it. They weren't rebuilding what their grandfather had left. They were expanding it, together. And for the first time since the will was read, Sierra stopped surviving the storm and started walking towards something new. Something they could build, not just in memory of a man they loved, but in honor of what he believed they could become. It was Rachel who reached out first. A short, cautious message appeared on Sierra's phone one Sunday afternoon. "Can we talk?" Just us. No punctuation, no emojis. Just 6 words that felt heavier than they looked. They met at a cafe halfway between their homes. Neutral ground. Rachel arrived late, looking smaller without their mother beside her. Her makeup was perfect, as always, but there was something fragile behind it. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, clinging to something warm in a world gone cold. "Thanks for coming," Rachel said. Sierra nodded, unsure of where the conversation would lead. Rachel didn't waste time. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd lose her mind if she did." Her voice cracked, just a little. I needed to say I'm sorry." Sierra stayed quiet. Rachel looked up, eyes glassy. "I said terrible things. I believed her."
About you, about Grandpa. I didn't want to, but it was easier than facing the truth. And what truth is that? Sierra asked.
Rachel swallowed. "That you were the only one listening. That he didn't leave you the business out of spite. He left it because you actually paid attention, because you cared." A long pause passed between them. "I'm not asking for anything," Rachel added quickly. "Not money, not a job, I miss you. I miss Julian, and I'm tired of choosing silence over what's right." For the first time, Sierra saw the sister she used to believe she had. A girl lost in their mother's shadow, desperate for approval, only now realizing how much of herself she had given up for it. "I miss you too," Sierra said quietly. "But if we do this, it has to be honest. No sides, no manipulation." Rachel nodded. "No more pretending." And just like that, something small but real began to shift. They didn't fix everything in that cafe. They didn't even try. But they opened a door that had been shut for years. Sometimes healing doesn't come with a breakthrough. Sometimes it begins with a seat across the table and the courage to say, "I was wrong." The email came late, past midnight, subject line simple and stark. Truce. Sierra stared at it for a long time before clicking. Inside were just a few sentences. "I've spent the past year angry. It hasn't brought me peace. Rachel tells me the business is doing well. She says Julian is thriving. I miss my children. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. No lawyers, no demands, just talk." Mom. There was no signature, no apology. But for Veronica, this was a kind of surrender. Sierra forwarded it to Samantha, then read it again and again, searching for the trap, for the angle, but it wasn't there, not this time. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she called Rachel and read it to her. Rachel's voice was quiet. "She means it. She doesn't know how to say it, but she's trying." They met a few days later at a quiet restaurant, Ethan nearby just in case. Veronica arrived alone. No scarf, no sunglasses. Just a plain blouse and a woman who looked tired in a very human way. She didn't beg, she didn't spin stories. She simply said, "I made mistakes. I see that now." Sierra didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't make promises, but she listened. And for the first time in her life, she saw her mother as more than a villain or a wall. She saw her as a woman unraveling, trying to find her way back to something real. Maybe that was enough to begin. The foundation opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no press release. Just a modest building with Walter's name on the sign and a mission etched in bronze. Legacy through opportunity. Inside, they offered workshops, mentoring, small business grants for young people with big ideas and no support. Julian stood beside Sierra at the entrance, fresh off his final exams, already asking about expanding outreach to trade schools. Rachel was there too, quiet but present. She volunteered at a local shelter now, saying less, doing more. That was enough. Veronica came late, standing in the back during Sierra's opening remarks. She didn't speak. She didn't stay long. But she stayed long enough. That night, Sierra sat in her grandfather's old study, now their shared office, flipping through his journal. On the last page, scribbled in his fading script, were the words she hadn't seen before. The true measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you do with it. Make it matter. She read that line over and over, letting it settle in her bones. She hadn't fixed everything. Some wounds take years. Some never close. But she'd learned that standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone. It means building something that lasts. Not in your name, but in your values. That's what Walter had left her, and now it's what she chooses to leave behind.